Hi, I'm Jessica Rudnicki with Reynolds & Reynolds. Welcome back to Connected. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Jeff Risner, founder of the Appraisal Lane, about the current state of the used car market and how consumer demand can help you sell more cars. Let's get connected. Jeff, it's so wonderful to have you back on the podcast today. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, Jess, I appreciate it. It is definitely interesting times right now. So good time to catch up.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I didn't get the chance to interview you the first time, so I'm actually really excited about this interview today because the last time we had you on the podcast, we were in the very beginning stages of the pandemic. So, and Jeff, I think it's safe to say a lot has changed since then, especially with the used car market. What can you tell us about used car prices in this current climate today?
Well, Jess, I would say a couple things. I don't think anybody could have predicted over the last 3 to 5 months what we were going to be experiencing and going through on so many levels. From the economy and the pandemic and what it does. Specifically to our business. When you talk about used car prices right now, there's one which is retail, and then the other one which is wholesale, which is kind of an amalgamation or reflection of retail demand and wholesale supply. So what we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 weeks is the market's kind of plateaued, and we're starting to see some cracks in the market. We've seen declining sales percentage at wholesale auctions steadily over the last 5 weeks, and that's starting to increase the standing car park at the auctions, which is kind of taking some of the pressure off buyers as they feel like, okay, there are some cars to be had, and I don't have this panic sense of desperation that I need something to put on my shelves. So that's kind of what we're seeing. And we're starting to see a widening gap between nice, clean, low mileage, well-equipped, clean vehicle history report cars and cars with a little bit of a story and kind of some higher recon needs to get that car ready for retail because people want to keep their inventories tight, keep spinning their inventory as fast as they can, and not get stuff log jammed in the back with service and get everything ready for retail.
Definitely. So you mentioned supply and demand. Are you referring to the decrease in production of new cars from manufacturers?
I think supply and demand is, many factors. Some of the things that I talked about initially with kind of the pandemic, the closures of the dealerships, the closures of the factories. And once the factories started to open up, there was a break in the supply chain. How we got the cars delivered to new car dealerships, those resources were allocated elsewhere. People had to take contracts and keep their trucks on the road. And if the plants weren't manufacturing and putting inventory out to dealerships, they had to go get loads elsewhere. So there was definitely a 4 to 6 week delay where before we could get the shipping flowing back to the dealerships. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in the wholesale market is as new car supplies have started to come back, that directly impacts used car supply. Now we're seeing trade-ins and we're seeing more inventory and we're seeing end of term lease cars that can be turned in and new cars leased. So, it's not any one factor. New car supply came back. The other thing that I would say that I think a lot of people don't talk about is it's about flow and access to inventory. Through the summer, there was actually a ridiculously large amount of used vehicles that were standing on the ground at auctions. And it was the auction's lack of resources to get more of those cars inspected and put on the online channels that reduced the flow, which the impact was even if the demand didn't increase, the flow, put a disparity there. So it's about balance between supply and demand. And there was definitely an imbalance all summer, and the scales are starting to tip the other way right now.
So I'm assuming that's a good thing for car dealers. In your opinion, what do you think they should be doing now with this, now that the balance is starting to come back into play?
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of riding the market. So I think they need to stay close to the market. They need to stay disciplined. They need to, when you start to feel a pushback in the market, don't hold on to gross, tighten your deals and keep your inventory spinning. Because if you're spinning and you're turning, you're adjusting and adapting to the marketplace. And it's when you hold on and the wheel quits turning that it hurts. So what I would say is as we're going through this, correction, and I don't think it's anything catastrophic, it's more like a regular seasonal correction where we had in probably high valuations all summer. And now things are just getting back to normal. But during that transition back to normal, if you're not on it, and focused on your business every day and adjusting your pricing to the market, it could be a painful October.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the impact that this has had on auctions. It's obviously had an impact on used car valuations and some sort of impact on customer trade-ins. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe some of the areas that you see improvement in those areas?
Well, I think we had some improvement because of the spike in valuations. That created a pool of equity that, quite frankly, consumers weren't aware they had. You're going down through a normal depreciation curve coming into the spring market and what would be a normal summer. And we saw some swings in valuation because of the lack of new cars. And so they were focused on new car alternatives. And I could highlight one or two specific examples, particularly with the Asian imports. Valuations went up on current model year small sport utilities that they had no supply of new, and they went up as much as 20% in a 4-week period because dealers were so desperate to stock something and have something available for sale that they paid an incredible premium. And so those will start to correct and come back now that the supply, and so that's going to create a little bit of pressure on the OEs to incentivize consumers and put ways in front of the consumers where they can transact, because the equity that was apparent for them in June, July, and August is kind of going away as the market comes down. So that positive equity in your vehicle is diminishing right now.
Yeah. Well, that's great information, Jeff. Thanks for sharing that with me and with our viewers. It has been an absolute pleasure having you back on the podcast. I'm so excited I got to talk to you today. Before we hop off, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience, or any tips or best practices you want to make sure that they're aware of?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would just reiterate is stay disciplined and stay current and keep your inventory spinning. If you're doing that, you mitigate any exposure to, a decline in the market, and you stay current for your customers. So just stay the course.
Well, great advice, Jeff. Thanks for those insights on the used car market, and thanks again for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess.
Jeff shared some great insights on the used car market and why it's so important to have a system in place to make sure you're capitalizing on every sale. Before we hop off, just a quick reminder, you can watch or listen to past and future podcast episodes on YouTube or Apple and Spotify podcasts by searching for the Connected Podcast. Subscribe on these channels to get notified every Wednesday when new episodes are released. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.